with rolfing, as you described it, it's about elongating or helping shorten different fascial tissue to balance out the body to improve a condition. And the contrast you made was like, yes, that's you have the similar approach structurally, things that you're noticing, things that you're seeing, but that there is another element to it that you feel is distinct and you think is vital to actually getting at underlying causes.
Yeah, so that's where there was this huge leap for me. It was a huge transition in my work and in my life. And actually when I made the shift from manual technique to try to get change in fascial tissue to more of an energetic technique, I made that shift in how I was working, and so it was basically a shift from doing body work where I'm manually working with tissue to doing energy work where it's primarily a hands-off technique. And of course, my clients who were there for rolfing, not for energy work, were wondering what the hell I was doing. And I can't tell you how many times I heard them say, "You can push harder," or, "Why aren't you doing anything?" And I was following this intuitive flow, and it was this big process where I, in order to follow the intuitive flow, I had to work a certain way. And to make a long story short, I lost about 90% of my clients. I literally went from doing about 30 sessions a week to doing 4 or 5.
That's wild, though.
Yeah.
That's not usually the sign that you're on the right track.
Right.
I also think it's funny that their response to you was your response to having to talk about your feelings at rolfing school. It's like, what the hell are we doing here?
Yeah. It was odd because it's like I could not get myself to keep, just doing the manual rolfing technique. I was going broke because I didn't have enough clients, and at a certain point, after it took about a year to kind of whittle my clientele down. I couldn't pay my bills, and at a certain point, I went and got a job at the Cheesecake Factory after 10 years of full-time rolfing. Friends of mine were just saying, "What is wrong with you? Just keep doing the rolfing technique," and I just couldn't do it. It was like my art, it was like, I will not compromise the art. It was just like, look, in order for me to do this work and to go into the flow that I go into, it happens the way it happens. It just felt true enough and deep enough to me that I was willing to stay true to the intuitive flow. It was probably a 5-year turnaround before I kind of got back to having a full clientele again. So anyway, that's more on the personal story note. But as far as,
I mean, it's a good story, though. I think it really. What was the feeling like that you kept going with it? You're talking about a flow state, which is something that we'll get into at some point because it's definitely tied into all this. But what were the signs of encouragement that you should keep doing it after, you said you whittled down all your clients to nothing in a year and then took another 4 years to turn it around? Like, what were the signs that you should keep going?
Yeah, it's a good question. Primarily, it was this intuitive guidance. I had shifts, in my consciousness, and I saw the truth, or saw this certain truth, and
it sounds like a religious experience.
Yeah, no doubt.
To borrow another, or I'm sure a series of religious experiences. It's not, wouldn't limit it to one. Yeah, well, I would say one doesn't always result in 5 years of effort, but
right.
So I guess, like, for me, that is true in itself. That you just, or like, if that's a term that doesn't relate, like a life-changing experience, or I guess it's tough because I don't want to use too many terms that are unrelatable, but just to some extent, it may be a relatively unrelatable experience. But I think intuition's a powerful word that if it would go against what you felt is true to not keep doing it.
Right. I use the computer analogy because I think it works really well. The ego mind is a hard drive, and consciousness is the internet. The prevailing mode that we live in is that our cognitive rational mind is what we think is self, and what we are navigating by, and we largely are navigating by our hard drive. Our hard drive is a bunch of programs that are largely trauma-based, defense-based, and whatever's showing up on our mind screen at any given moment, we're just kind of going with that. We're not even like managing, like, well, that's weird. Why is that up on my screen right now? Instead, it's we just kind of like, well, that's truth. Or that says something about me. It's on my mind screen. That must be the quality that I am. Or that must be some truth about me. And that's as inaccurate as saying that something that's on your computer screen says something about your particular computer. So anyway, I could go on and on trying to make these analogies, but at a certain point,
I think an important clarification about that analogy is that, like a hotspot, and this is where I think it does work, like you're saying that you're a hotspot, like it's facilitating someone else's connection to the internet. But it wasn't like that wasn't possible before, and it only happens because it was already possible.
Right.
We all have this potential connection, and it takes, in my experience and opinion, some life-changing event, some religious experience, some spiritual experience, some bigger than you experience to make you aware of those ego processes or those programs or those ways of seeing yourself that aren't based in consciousness.
Being hooked up to the internet doesn't make my hard drive any better. Obviously, the nature of the work I do, that's kind of one of the main points I make, is that I'm using consciousness to improve the ego, to improve the body, to improve mentally, emotionally. But it requires work. That's why I use the word work. It's not that it just happens all of a sudden. You get hooked up to the internet, and now you have access to something that you can then do work with. That work doesn't come easy. Really, what an awakening does is it doesn't show you the awesomeness of your ego. It does the very opposite, and it challenges every ego strength you thought you had. There's a real difference between being hooked up and how embodied is that hookup, right? That's the big new age critique, is that, okay, you can get hooked up, you can go into this higher state, this altered state, and experience consciousness, and it can be quite blissful, but it doesn't mean that you're embodying it.
There's a lot of stuff in integral theory about the state experiences,
right,
and the relative stage at which you experience them, and they can either change you or reinforce existing programs.
Right.
And I think that is kind of what you're talking about, that it's a potential for change, but it by no means equates with change.
Definitely. But so to stick with the line of thought that we were on here, as far as, the shift to the subtle, the comment you just made was really important, which was, okay, what was the feedback I got, or what kept me going despite losing my clientele? Way more than anything, it was just that I was so moved by these deeper insights. It was just really compelling and really profound, and they created change in me. I got change via this different way of working in myself in ways that I had spent a couple decades trying to get to happen. of course, I began working that same way with clients. I was aware that I could get more profound change working in these more subtle ways. And to sit and do the manual work, it just became obvious to me that, okay, I'm wasting my time here pounding away on this person's tissue. And I just couldn't do that and collect the check and feel okay about it. It was like I had to stay true to what I felt was the most effective thing for me to do with the hour that that they were in my office. It was a real growth process for me to just be able to stand by it, and it still is to just to, like I said in that first episode of the podcast, to stand by this weird esoteric thing that I do, and I'll say that the results speak for themselves, but again, it's like, but a lot of people don't do enough sessions for that to be the case, or the results are hard to measure. And so there's a lot of just having to stand in it and be true to it and kind of let the chips fall where they do. And it's been a wonderful experience that in the last 15 to 20 years that I've been working that way, I've enjoyed a full clientele and really positive feedback, and I've survived on basically on referrals alone since about 98.
Are there any early examples of results that were encouraging? Because I definitely know now, I mean, at least personally, that it's effective, and I know a lot of people that have had similar experiences, but I wonder, were there any outward signs of encouragement or your new approach was bringing?
In myself, I was getting change in my hip and in my jaw and the various places that my body hurt, and I was having changes in my psyche, and so there's certainly my own personal experience, but as far as working with clients, yeah, I mean, I had clients that had been coming for several years, and we were up against something where I'd obviously done something that was helpful enough to have them keep coming. For example, let's say they had a hip problem that we really we were kind of, at this plateau as far as improvement, and they still were struggling. And then, and then I could see or feel or sense in the way that I can sense that there was that we were getting through blocks that previously we couldn't get through, and clients were noticing that. Clients were getting off the table and feeling like, wow, that really feels different. It hasn't felt like that in years. They'd say that there were just results that started happening. People would say that their pain was going away and the functionality was improving, and so there was definitely feedback in that way that okay, this is real, this is happening. There started to be a consistency to the feedback I was getting from clients. And so that all, started to be real encouraging. Again, it was this thing where some people come in and it's like one session and they feel like it's a miracle because their pain they've had for a long time is now gone. And that usually means it wasn't a very deep pattern, or there's various things that can be the cause of that. It can be that, there was pressure on a nerve, and we got 3% of a pattern to let go, but that 3% was just enough to take pressure off a nerve, and now they're free of that nerve pain, and so that's dramatic. But in general, you don't resolve a deep-seated pattern in someone's psyche in one session. It's a process, but symptoms can disappear long before you resolve that overall pattern. In answer to your question, the symptoms people were coming in with, I started getting better results doing the subtle work than I had gotten doing the more manual body work.
And that's got to be encouraging for them too. That some of these that give you an opportunity to get to the cause if some of these symptoms begin to be alleviated. I think what what is striking about the process is that something that might seem impossible seems like there's some hope around it.
I think maybe Einstein, there's that quote that you can't solve a problem at the level it was created at. It's like you got to get up above it. You got to get outside of it to see, what it is that's happening. If you're stuck inside of it, you're limited in the dimensionality of your perspective. It's like being in a maze and you try every option and you can't get out of that maze. And it's like, in fact, there is no exit to that maze as far as, on a horizontal plane, but you can go up and over the wall. But if you don't know that that's an option, if that dimension doesn't exist in your awareness, you don't even consider it. And so come to realize that, okay, I'm just stuck. Like, this is hopeless. And it's like, well, it's true that it's hopeless within the parameters that you're stuck in. But what you're not realizing is that there are additional dimensions that exist that are available to you that will enable you to resolve that problem, which again contributes to why I call it the dimension approach. It's less about me getting someone out of the maze, and it's less about me helping them up over the wall, although there's some of that. But primarily, it's that I help them become aware of that additional dimension, that I can see that they aren't seeing. They've got this body pain, and let's say that they are aware that it's this physical tissue pattern that is the cause of the pain, which usually there's not even that, right? Usually it's just the pain. But if you become aware that, it's this tissue pattern, which was what I became aware of when I learned about Rolfing, right? It was, okay, my hip it's not just genetic. It's not that I injured it and the injury won't heal. It's not that I'm not eating enough vegetables or something. It's that there's this tissue pattern, this strain pattern in my tissue, and then it was okay. I spent a decade stretching like crazy and getting body work, and on and on and on. And I just that was the only I was stuck, at that dimension, and I see that with clients, and so they're tugging and pulling and stretching and working on it, but it's a whole dimensional shift to become aware of, wait a minute, the cause of that tissue being tight is not on the level of, or it's not within the dimension of simply putting a physical stretch on that tissue. It's a whole different thing. In the same way, there's this parallel that happens, or that's easy to make, like in the same way that you can take an individual person and you can track a developmental growth spectrum, right, from childhood through adulthood. There's these obvious shifts that happen at various ages. We don't expect 40-year-old behavior or awareness from a 4-year-old, right? We operate in these different ways, and you can track the history of civilization, and there's these parallels. Ken Wilber, with the integral approach, does that in a real profound, complex way. So what I'm getting at is you can kind of make a parallel to, okay, at a certain point in history, humanity discovered electricity, and it was a game changer, right? Total game changer. We don't really understand electricity. As we now know, it starts to get into this quantum situation. It gets more and more confusing. But we do know how to harness it, and we do know how to utilize it. And when there are issues with an electrical system, we know how to assess it and make the changes, right? If you make an analogy to the human body, and if you say subtle energy is analogous to electricity, becoming aware that, the human body, not just the nervous system, not just the brain, not just the mind, but also the fascial tissue, the bones, every kind of tissue, it's an electrical system. Electricity is super important with it. And so on the gross level in your house, if if there's some kind of structural problem, and then you see that, oh, there's, a wall is collapsing, and it's collapsing because the roof leaked and the water, the studs got wet and they started to rot, and now it's collapsing. It's okay. That's not an electrical problem. But if you discover that, oh, there's a short in the electrical system, and that's causing certain symptoms, it's a whole different system you look at, right? Or is it a plumbing problem? And what I'm saying is, okay, what so many people are doing with regard to physical ailments, for example, is they think it's just this tissue problem, and they're thinking very mechanically, and they're tugging and pulling on tissue. But the elasticity of fascial tissue, for example, is an electrical situation. It's an energy situation. And so you got to look at the energy system. You got to look at, why is the electrical system behaving the way it's behaving?
I like that analogy. And it's also thinking about like the evolution of understanding, even, so you mentioned socially, but personally, but like we learned how to build houses a long time before we learned how to wire them for electricity.
Yeah. Good point.
And I think it's a good analogy. So you have this experience that makes you more aware of electricity. I wonder, I think it's how do we talk about discovering the subtle realm? There's a sense, I'm trying to think of the words to describe it, because I feel like it's a sense, or it's another organ of perception, or there's already personal experience with it that people have that just may not have a term for it.
For the subtle?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point, because people, it's not like they're not picking up on subtle cues.
Right.
The word I tend to use is, what are we registering? The term register, I'm using that to refer to a certain mechanism, if you will, in the mind that has us become aware of something. There's constantly just enormous amounts of data coming into the brain and into the mind, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, etc. And so again, to use the computer analogy, it's like, okay, but what's showing up on your mind screen, right? What are you registering? You drive your car from here to there, and sometimes you didn't register any of the drive, but probably most of the time you didn't register what your feet were doing. They were just doing it. You make some movement with your physical body. You're not registering, well, what is each muscle doing? It's just infinite, right? As far as the different things we could register or not. So we kind of have this circuit breaker in our mind that makes these decisions, and it relays certain data into a certain place in our system where we register it. We sort of become awake to it, and then that as far as memory, that tends to be the case, right? That there's no memory unless we register it. It really all becomes a question of, well, what are you registering and what are you not? For example, if awakening and enlightenment is about becoming conscious of consciousness, or conscious of your soul, or conscious as your soul, or conscious as essence, etc. Essence, your soul, your consciousness, or whatever, it's already there, right? It already exists. It doesn't need to be created. It doesn't need to be developed. It doesn't need to be fixed up. It's already there in its full glory. The problem is that you're not aware of it, right? You're not conscious of it. And so it's a really important, distinction to make. So becoming conscious of something is the game changer. To block consciousness of something actually causes problems. It's not just a neutral thing. It's the analogy I use is, you can close your eyes. That doesn't mean the sun went out, right? But as powerful as the sun is, all you got to do is close your eyes, and you eliminate it. You get to experience darkness. Like, if you want to experience darkness, you can experience darkness. That's the idea as far as humans experiencing separateness, isolation, disconnectedness. If the sun is God, we close our eyes and then we think the sun abandoned us. And the idea of waking up is that you open your eyes. You not only now can see the light, so to speak, you become aware of, oh, I was closing my eyes. The sun didn't go out. I was doing it myself. I was separating myself from the light. That principle holds up with regard to awakening. It also holds up, and this is one of the things that was so profound of an insight for me. If your ankle hurts, and your ankle's got some strain pattern in it because you hurt it when you were 5 years old, and now you're 50 years old. It's like the reason your ankle's still messed up, the reason the tissue is still tight, and the reason that now your shoulder hurts, because your ankle's messed up, the reason the ankle's still like that is that when you turned your ankle, you closed your eyes, you split. It was traumatic. It's trauma if there was splitting. If the ankle thing was intense enough, you split in your mind, and what you split was consciousness from your ankle. Consciousness didn't really abandon your ankle, right? It's still there. But you made a split in your mind to where now for the last 45 years, consciousness has not been shining on your ankle. So your ankle has lived in the dark. And there's all these symptoms that have happened as a result of that. And the fix isn't to stretch your ankle. It isn't to do exercises with your ankle. It isn't to do surgery on your ankle. The fix is to find that place in the mind where you closed your eyes, where you closed your mind and caused a split between consciousness and your ankle. And even though it's 45 years later, when you open back up again and work through the experience that was too overwhelming at the time and reestablish the connection between consciousness and your ankle, healing happens. The symptoms start going away. The tissue lets go, and repair starts happening. Joints that the doctors said won't repair themselves start repairing themselves because it wasn't some kind of degeneration. It was a mechanical wearing down, and now the wearing down isn't happening because the tissue opened up and the tensegral lift is back, so now the joint's not being compressed, and now the body can actually repair the joint. I mean, it just goes on and on. The emotional symptoms that were really highly influenced by the ankle problem, the shoulder problem now at 50 starts feeling better because your ankle is improving. There's just this chain of events that happens that's enormous.
If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com.